This is Worthless, coming to you live from the office of Dr. Sam Jones, a veterinarian in our local community. Thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
We have heard from an anonymous source of the possibility of a major agricultural disease outbreak in northeast Ohio. I was wondering if you could tell us about the situation.
We are very concerned about a disease that potentially could affect the health of thousands of animals and its potential to spread like wildfire. The federal agencies have stepped in, so I don't have an exact picture of what's going on, but I can tell you a few things that I observed at the farm of Mr. Yerish. He's a local farm.
Oh, tell us. It is critical that we know.
75% of his cattle have a fever. 25% of the cattle I saw had trouble walking, and at least half of them had developed blisters and are drooling. In a word, what's going on at his farm is trouble.
What is the danger to other farms in the area?
Danger to other farms in the area? It's much larger than that. This disease has the potential to destroy the agricultural economy of the whole state, and it even threatens the national economy. I just encourage farmers to keep their eyes out for the warning signs. This is potentially devastating. I do know, though, that the relevant information has been sent to Plum Island.
Doctor, please explain to us about Plum Island, and what is the significance that samples have been sent there?
Right. That's it? That's it? All right. We're now on the state level with a very small group of panels, experts here. We're having 5 more people join them so you can just... In terms of where we are, we're days 3 to 6. Mr. Yarsh, Dr. Doorman, if there indeed has been a quarantine issued, who's going to order it? Dr. Doorman, Dr. Brisker, we'll begin with you.
I'm going to write that quarantine while I'm on the farm. It's a handwritten form that I can actually fill out, and I will leave that with him. And that's just a piece of paper that says that no animals can be brought to or removed from a quarantine premises without the written permission of the Director of Agriculture.
And you give that physically to Mr. Yarsh?
Yes, I do.
You also posted, but going back to Professor Sharp's question, you posted somewhere? It's only something that he's going to receive in his hand?
It's something that he will receive in his hand.
So our question then to our law enforcement experts, how do you go about enforcing this quarantine?
Once we would receive the information of the quarantine, we would probably go out and set up a perimeter around the farm and control anybody that would be trying to enter in or to exit the farm, and also maintain civil order there.
How will you know that? It should be. How will you know that the quarantine? How will you know that a quarantine has been issued, or a quarantine order has been issued?
It would be communicated to us. It would be given to us in some way, shape, or form.
And then when you say you'll set up some kind of a control or a command around it, what does that do, though, in terms of alerting maybe the neighbors that something is amiss? Is that a calculation, a factor in all this?
I would say that at the time that we would be setting up a perimeter around it, I would think that the word would be out that there's a problem there. And if not, if they don't know, then they would be notified by us.
Mr. Yarsh, back to you. There's suddenly a perimeter of policemen around your house, around your farm. How are your neighbors going to respond to that?
Now what'd he do? That'd be the first thing. And you know, as long as more as this goes on here today, the more I'm glad I sold my cows, because I'm getting look like a boogeyman all the time.
Yeah, Dr. Doorman.
Just ask a question, Amos. Do we have confirmation of disease yet? Do we have results back from Plum Island?
Yes. Aaron Page says yes.
We do.
Do we? No? No? No. Later. Not yet.
Okay. So we're still working on the assumption that we have a highly likely. We don't have a confirmed
Correct.
case yet. Okay.
Back to you, Mr. Yarsh. There's a perimeter of police. Your neighbors, yes, maybe no. How's this all going to affect you?
As far as what?
How you go about conducting your business?
Well, try to keep going on as usual, I guess. Can't just stop because I'm going to have other things to do. So just going to have to work with the veterinarians and go on.
Part of our perimeter security would also be training law enforcement at the scene on how to get folks in and out of a farm properly when there's a highly contagious disease like foot and mouth disease present. So part of our job with that biosecurity training group is to make sure that our law enforcement counterparts are also observing the proper biosecurity measures. And if somebody needed to come in to Mr. Yarish's farm, do they have the ability to do that? Yes. And what we would do is make sure that, their wheels get sprayed down with disinfectant, or they get cleaned, boots get cleaned, and hopefully they do not take that back to their farms with them.
Mr. Chief Miller, you wanted to add something in terms of how you go about enforcing the quarantine? Because what strikes me here is you have this perimeter, you have this order, people are going to come, people are going to go. How's it really going to play out? How does it really play out in real life?
There would be curious people coming by to see what's going on. For the most part, we would have to shoo them along.
Shoo them along or shoot them along?
Their choice. And we would have we would be empowered to enforce if anybody tried to violate it, and we would do that through physical arrest. But in most scenarios, or in real life when we set up perimeters, the difficult part would probably be at this point. Now we have a perimeter. You're going to have news media, it's been announced, wanting to be near and getting shots of that too. So one of the things we would have to do is find a way to contain them. Normally at emergency scenes, they're the worst violators of perimeters.
What kind of rights, Mr. Harper, I'll ask you, what kind of legal rights does Mr. Yarish have in terms of the quarantine? Can he challenge this?
He certainly could challenge it. The statutes provide for initially an administrative hearing route. The challenge does not stop the quarantine. The quarantine is going to continue. And obviously he has access to courts too, but in a situation such as this, most often the courts would recognize the dangerousness of the situation and follow the statutory framework.
And this administrative hearing, within what time period will it actually convene?
He has a right to convene, to have an administrative hearing convened within 30 days. Under the statutory scheme. Again, the quarantine does continue during the time. So the quarantine is not stayed while we are awaiting the administrative hearing.
And realistically, what would be his chances of succeeding in this administrative hearing? And what would you have to show in order to have his petition denied?
We're speculating. It's always it's always difficult to say what would be his chances. Assuming that let me explain a little bit. Administrative hearing situation is done by an independent hearing officer. It's done pursuant to Chapter 119 of the Ohio Administrative Code. He has a right to be represented. He has a right to present his case. The state would also present their case, and the state's case would be presented by the Attorney General's office. With all of the facts that we have about a dangerous infectious disease, I would think the likelihood of him getting the quarantine absolved at that point would not be very high.
Mr. Franks, in terms of being a health commissioner, where are you in all this, sir?
Well, if I were the health commissioner of the Lorain County Health Department, we certainly would have a major concern as to what was going on, because the newscast did not say or specify which disease it was. It said it was a disease of animals. And the local health department's phone right now would probably be ringing off the hook about, what about our food supply? What about our children? Can it be spread to other animals? How is it going to, affect the population of the community? And so what we need to do as a local health department is try to get nailed down as to where everything is and involve the local board of health in what is going on so that we can get some good information out. Now, even if it is leaked out that it was foot and mouth disease, today in the computer age, people don't have to wait for an official news release. They don't have to wait for anything to come out. They can get that right off the internet, and many times they will probably by now have confused it with hand, foot, and mouth disease, which is different than foot and mouth disease. So we're in a state right now of probably semi-panic within our department trying to find out what is going on with this farm.
And that turns me over to the two of you. As well, in this age of panic and the internet, and later in the afternoon we have two reporters with us, but in terms of the internet and bloggers, how can you go about controlling information?
Well, let me go back to what I said during the last segment, and that's that we would want to be proactive in educating about the process. You know, it's important that people understand the process, and I think you know, we have a responsibility to be transparent and talk about the facts that we know. The facts that we know at this time are
10 times, right?
The facts that we know are that we have an initial diagnosis by a veterinarian that we have a highly likely case. We know that samples have been sent for confirmation. We know that we do not have a positive confirmation at this time. We know the process. We can explain the process, and we would work very hard to do that. At this point, I would be working kind of based on the circumstances here. I think that upon that first call from a reporter, I would have explained the process to them, explained the facts as we knew them, and then very quickly gone to a news release, so that in this case, this isn't something, because it could be so widespread and have so much appeal, I guess, to a broad audience, that person is not going to have an exclusive on this story. We're going to put that information out there so that we can be proactive. And, you know, I don't know how that reporter is going to write that story when it comes out tomorrow morning. So I'd like to be as forward as possible in getting the facts that we know out there from a credible source.
Mr. Adams, as a health commissioner, how do you respond when people start calling you and they're obviously very concerned, and you have some kind of a news release coming out, a press statement coming out? People are concerned, and they're calling you. Your phone is ringing and ringing. What are you telling people?
Well, you going there or here?
You.
Well, as the emergency management director rather than the health commissioner, this is a very backwards incident that has occurred, because typically incidents occur locally, and we notify our partners up the hill towards the state direction, who then asks for assistance from the feds. This one's occurred at the state level. They've been notified, even though it's a local incident. They've notified their state partners. They've brought in their federal partners, and nowhere in the plan does it say that we notify our local partners as to what needs to be accomplished. Now, we would undoubtedly find out by the rumor control method that from our Ohio State ag guy, who would call and say, by the way, are you aware of, or our road officers would know what's going on out at the farm. And we would have phone calls from our field liaisons from Columbus, who would pick up the phone and say, hey, just be aware, this is happening. But we wouldn't have yet received official notification that is anything going on for us to activate anything beyond the court-ordered request to do an isolation of the farm. So we're in the dark at this point unless we are communicated with by our state partners.
So you're in essence waiting to receive information. That's your status.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out at this point, while the response has, you know, we've been kind of responding in a, if this turns out to be bad manner. Right. But at this point, I'm calling
my counterpart at the Emergency Management Agency, the Department of Health, the Department of Natural Resources, the EPA, and every other partner agency that we have so that we're getting on the same page. Also, I'm making contact with USDA, with commodity organizations that might get phone calls about this. I'm talking to the Farmers Union and the Farm Bureau. That may be the next step. You know, I'm talking with my counterparts at the Ohio Department of Health, and in their system, they have notification methods within their system.
Speaking of health, Mr. Shade, County Commissioner, health issues, we have 2 different counties here. Do you function the same way? Do you talk with each other? How does it tie back to the state level, back to the local level?
As a local health department, we would, if we had this kind of a scenario where we weren't sure but we knew something might be brewing, we would immediately implement our incident command structure.
Which means what?
Which means we have folks already delegated according to their capacity to either handle the situation locally or be put into a blend of other people for like a unified command structure if the disease would start to manifest and grow across more than one county. So we would be a team player in essence, a local team player in the bigger scope of the state emergency management, state emergency operations.
And would you and Mr. Franks be in contact with one another?
Absolutely. We would have a unified command, and most of the health commissioners, through the Ohio Department of Health, we have quite a few systems in place right now for an alerting network through the Ohio Public Health Communication System, what we call OFIS.
And would you also have a representative in the perimeter command that Chief Miller and Mr. Backer put together here? Are you going to have a representative there? Are you online? How does that work?
Right. What we would do, we would have the county-wide emergency operations center would be staffed with folks from the health department, sheriff's department, hospital, and then any of the other agricultural folks from the state level or the federal level would be there as well. And back at the health department, we would also be manning, as Mr. Franks alluded to, the hotline would be set up for concerned citizens because they're not sure if it's a zoonotic type disease that may affect humans or not.
Mr. Adams, you wanted to add something?
Just to comment on that is that we too would have been opening our emergency operations center based upon the feedback we've been getting. We would also be asking that Dr. Doorman, you need to come and visit us and sit down and give us a briefing as to, I don't want to hear, I'm sorry to the PIOs at the end of the table.
Wait, PIOs?
Public Information Officers. I don't want to hear from a PIO.
Oh.
I would like to hear from you direct. Come to my EOC, the Operations Center, and speak to us directly as to what is going on, what is happening, and we would probably be asking for your state counterparts and federal counterparts to join us in a conference call to get us and our local officials, particularly county commissioners, up to speed on what is going on with this particular incident and what we may be requested or not requested to do locally.
Meaning you're going to want to have, in this case, Dr. Doorman, who's a real expert, you want to hear directly from her.
Correct.
Dr. Doorman, you're going to be receiving calls from Mr. Adams and other individuals such as Mr. Adams. How do you divide your time? There are only 24 hours in a day.
I'm in the barn and my cell phone is not on. No. I'm kidding. That really is a decision that is up to the state veterinarian as to how, who he sends. Obviously if I'm busy either taking samples or doing something on the farm, I may not be able to pull myself away in order to speak. Doesn't mean we can't send another person just like me that we call it dirty veterinarian, clean veterinarian that has not been on an infected premises, and certainly that may be an option that a colleague of mine may come to explain the disease and what's going on.
I think it's important that we need to have that line of communication opened up, regardless of whether it's our dirty veterinarian or our clean veterinarian, but to have that direct line of communication that can educate us locally as to what are we going to be asked to provide.
And how to respond to questions from concerned citizens.
That's correct, because we too have the ability to set up a rumor control phone in addition to what we'd be doing at our health department.
Mr. Shade, you wanted to add something?
I would say it's, for everybody's understanding, it's paramount to state that part of the reason we have incident command structure and all of us at the table who kind of already know each other is so we have a unified message. And that unified message is delivered by the appropriate people. So we don't have people shooting from the hip out in the field, so to speak. So that unified message is really important, irregardless of the type of disaster. And then the second thing that I think is worth mentioning would be the allocation of any resources. As you alluded to, how would Dr. Doorman's time be allocated? Well, a lot of the resource allocation needs to be planned and coordinated, you know, from Columbus. So if a disease would manifest and grow, where do we head it off at, and how is that done? So,
Chief Miller, you want to add something, sir?
Well, it sounds like then you've opened up a joint information center.
In this scenario where the word is out, I think that would be the best way to manage the flow of information, because we'd have public information people from all the involved agencies working in one place where we could coordinate messages and be available, so that if a reporter called and they wanted to know specifically about the human health threat, I'm not answering those questions. The health expert is.
I'm sorry, wait, hang on, Mr. House, you want to add something?
Just as important to note at this point in time, at the state level, at the Ohio EMA, the EOC would be at the very.
Well, you got to speak EOC, FBI, CIA.
The Emergency Operations Center would at the very least be at a CAS 2, which are a critical action system, the second of 3 levels. And at that level, we would have at the very least Department of Agriculture, Ohio Department of Health, EMA, appropriate agencies would already be meeting, discussing, assessing issues, and coordinating and sharing information and helping with decision making at the local level. Any resource needs out of the county, affected county, would be flowed to us, and we would have to identify whether we need to move to the next level. Certainly, given what we know now, the information and the public information that's out there and the inaccurate information, at the very least, our Joint Information Center at the state would be activated, coordinating, led by agriculture, working with our PIO, and they would be sharing information, making sure we have a consistent message coming out of the local county. And so we would be activated, and we would be considering at this point, once we had a confirmed case, whether we need full activation of the State Emergency Operations Center.
Mr. Couch, where are you in all this?
As the Public Information Officer for the state's Emergency Management Agency, certainly working down in our assessment room, down in the Emergency Operations Center on the front end of this, learning what's going on. But my role, as we continue to learn more and more information, is to partner with Melanie, partner with the PIOs from the public information officers from the other state agencies, so that collectively we are all operating in the Joint Information Center. And I think it bears to go back to what Dr. Doorman said at the beginning. The importance of speaking with one voice is very much what we believe in. That doesn't necessarily mean that I would be the only individual speaking. I am not the one voice, nor is Melanie the one voice, nor is Jay Carey from the Ohio Department of Health the one voice. We collectively, as the public information officers for the state of Ohio, are one voice. So we are putting that message out together, validating information, working together as a team to make certain we are putting out the best information and controlling any misinformation that's out there.
But how in real time do you get the information out to Mr. Franks, Mr. Shade, and Mr. Adams? And how is that working? I understand there's a unified message, but how is that being, if you will, relayed down?
Each agency has their own notification systems. You know, the Department of Agriculture, we have a system through our communications office where we contact, we would put information out through agricultural media or general media that have specific agriculture people. We would send that information to all of them. At the same time, we would be sending it to commodity organizations or key stakeholder groups. The Department of Health, while I'm not a spokesperson for them, I know that they have systems in place for notifying the health departments. I believe that in this situation that the state veterinarian would have contacted the Commissioner of Health in this county and had a conversation.
Ms. Little, where's the Attorney General?
Oh, he is not involved at this point. No. I would be probably in the Emergency Operations Center with the Executive Director, but right at this point there's nothing that would rise to that level.
Strauss?
I think it's important to note that while we have the State Emergency Operations Center activated, the county would also have theirs activated, and we have regular briefings, open conference lines, so information from all the state partners is melded together and forwarded out to the county, and all of the partners, the local partners, whether it be agricultural and EMA and law enforcement, will be getting the same message during their briefings. And so there would be direct communication from EOC to EOC.
Go ahead, Mr. Franks.
Well, I was going to say that, you know, in the real world situation, you know, having been through these, the press and the public is so far out ahead of the state and anybody else making official statements that the things that come down from the state or that we put out are what is actual fact. They're not going to comment on supposition. They're not going to comment on rumor. They're going to say this is not hand, foot, and mouth disease, but they're not going to say what it is until they really know. Those are things we know. We have the press calling us at the local health department. We have to accept what we're told. The press doesn't. They keep digging, digging, and digging. I get half of my information in a crisis from our local news reporter. When they call me, I say, well, you know, what do you know? You know, oh, really? And what are you looking into? Oh, okay. No, I won't tell the Beacon. You know, I won't tell the Plain Dealer, I promise. Just tell me what you know.
He's giving you an exclusive.
Yeah. So anyway, that way, I know what's going on out there. Because I said before, the public and everybody knows so much more from the Internet that, you know, our official statements really kind of lag behind, and we can't. The state can't, and we can't put out anything and comment on rumor. The press can't, you know, because they can say, well, you know, someone was spotted putting something in grain, you know, and do you know about that? You know, is it possible to do? You know, well, yeah, well, what have you heard? So, I mean, that's the reality of it when you're talking about, you know, talking to the public. The best thing that we have found that in something like that is, you know, when the public's in a state of panic, it's hard to educate them. You have to find a way to get rid of their panic so that you can educate them. You know, so.
Mr. Yarsh, you're sitting here listening to this interesting conversation here, but at the end of the day, it's your property that we're talking about. What are you learning from all this? What are you taking from all this?
Well, sounds pretty involved to me. Like I said before, if I pretty much do what I'm supposed to do from the beginning, I shouldn't have no problems with what they have to do as far as whatever comes afterwards. Because I reported my problem, it's in their hands, and then I have to work with them.
What we're hearing here from Mr. Franks, in a sense, is that the state agencies or county agencies are lagging behind in terms of the news. He feels he's, in essence, getting his information from reporters, correct? How do you overcome that?
Well, we have official statements prepared on this subject. I guess I mean, maybe in certain circumstances that has happened. I'm not aware of times when that has happened at our agency. But it can. I mean, many times rumors and misinformation and, you know, poorly developed stories can misinform people, but journalists have an ethical responsibility to make sure that the information that they're putting out is factual as well. And one of the things that you mentioned was about, you know, you might be gathering information from them about the terrorist aspect of this. We are able to talk about what we know, and in my case, I'm going to know about the animal disease response, but I'm not going to know about the FBI's investigation. I'm not going to be privy to that information. So a reporter may very well have many different sources, and they may be collecting information from those different sources. As an officer for the Department of Agriculture, I'm doing the same thing. My sources are just going to be different. They're the state veterinarian and the director of agriculture and the governor and you know, different organizations that represent farmers. So my resource base is just going to be different, I think, than that journalist's resource base. And that's why it's a good thing that reporters cover stories like this, because they do cover many different angles, and we're just one part of the bigger picture when it becomes a terrorism incident.
Mr. Couch?
I'd also like to add that with all the news releases that are coming out of the Joint Information Center, as well as with the situation reports that are coming out of the Joint Information Centers, we are sharing that information with the county emergency management agencies and have done that aggressively. In terms of the reporters, one of the first steps we're taking once the Joint Information Center is open is to actually notify the reporters. The center is open, here is our phone number, here's the place to contact us, here's where we're going to be putting updates, and really encouraging the reporters to come and seek information from us so that we can avoid situations where there is misinformation. Certainly, too, one of the responsibilities that we have is that we have a person assigned in the Joint Information Center to serve as a media monitor, and that person is taking the newspapers, watching television, watching the internet, seeing what's going on. If we're seeing misinformation going out, then it's our responsibility to get in front of that as quickly as possible. We have done that in the past with misinformation. We saw that in January of 2005 when we had misinformation about flooding in Columbus. And it's just a continual process that we work towards.
Chief Miller, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing. With the Joint Information Center, we're set up to deal with all of these different rumors that might be coming out. Keep in mind, with this scenario, we don't even have a confirmation yet. And so one of the things that we're going to do is immediately put information out to the news media. We will probably be doing that at the same time that our technical people are getting in contact with their technical people. What can happen is when this rolls so quickly, people may not have gotten informed before it gets into the newspaper, and people's feelings get hurt because they think, well, I'm next door to this farm, or I'm the county extension agent in this county, and I didn't know about it. Well, the news media is our method of getting information out as quickly as possible, and that reaches all of those people. In the process, a few people are probably not going to hear that personal phone call, and their feelings are going to get hurt. We want to avoid that as much as possible, but it does happen sometimes.
Mr. Shade, you want to add something?
Yeah, along the same lines. There's a mechanism for what we call multiple agency coordination, where, let's say in Lorraine County, where the farm is located, well, you have county commissioners, you have township trustees, you might have a village mayor or a municipal mayor. And what do you do with those folks during this whole crisis? Well, there's a place for them. We call it the policy development part of the incident. But you want to keep folks like that sequestered where you have contact with them and you brief them on what's going on. And that room can be opened up to people that work for the Ag Service or the Farm Bureau. It's not just the politician base. It's organizational base, agency based. So if you can envision the process at this point, you have a local emergency management location, you have an incident management room, and then you have this other group of, let's just call them the elected officials and agency heads in a policy room.
So in essence, we're functioning on a number of different levels with multiple things occurring simultaneously.
Right.
Chief Miller, Captain Baca, back to you. At what point will the neighbors come? Will the media come? Will passerbys stop? Will people who are simply hearing it out there that something is happening on Mr. Yarsh's farm? How are you going to be dealing with that?
I think they'll come just as soon as they hear. There'll always be people who will be curious and want to see and show up.
What are you going to do with them?
As the chief said, shoo them along. Maintain the security there. We'll do as what's directed by the EOC, Department of Agriculture.
Wait, meaning you're, in essence, going to be enforcing what?
That's correct. And
people become unruly. You're going to take them to some kind of a detention center? Is that is that how that will play out?
Well, if they fail to disperse or shoo along, they'll get an invitation to the bed and breakfast facility down there. And that's located in a gated community, too.
Is there also lunch or just bed and breakfast?
Well, there's 3 fine meals a day.
Mr. Franks, you want to add something?
I just, want to say in no way did I have to criticize the state agencies or their PIOs, but that's a fact of life. The example I can use is that we all knew Cocoa Crisp was going to be traded to Boston and who he was going to be traded for a week before the Indians announced it. Same thing happens in a disease outbreak. And right before, we can't make any, and they can't make any official statement or release anything unless they're totally and have it approved by everybody. So I did not mean to criticize the process. Okay.
There'll be a press statement coming out about that later. Wait, hang on. Mr. Yars, sir.
One thing on the news media part, what they want to do is kind of put it out to the terrorists that most sayings on the farm is, if you're found here at night, you might be found here in the morning. So that would probably just deter some of it from coming on.
So that goes from shoe along to shoot along.
No, they shoo them off after they're done with, because, like I say, we, got to kind of take care of ourselves too.
That's self-help, right? Dr. Doorman, back to you. Let's say, for the sake of moving along, that we now have confirmation. What's going to happen? Funnel us into the next step, and you, Dr. Brisker.
I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Brisker.
Our director would inform the governor's office of this positive. The EMA at this point would request an emergency declaration by
We can't hear you, sir.
Our director would inform the governor's office, obviously the positive foot and mouth found in Ohio at this time. The EMA would request an emergency declaration from the governor, which would mobilize forces, resources, that type of thing. The director, the governor, would co-authorize a statewide quarantine. ESF 11, which is the emergency response function that we are lead in, would come into play. The animal disease incident annex would be activated. All of those folks would be notified. CAS level 2 would be activated by the EMA at this time. The state agencies affected and the federal partners would be in the emergency mode, and we would probably notify adjacent states of the positive.
And then what would be the impact on this distinguished panel post-confirmation? How is that going to either change what you do or affect your, if you will, the minute thereafter? Mr. House, let's begin with you. What happens?
At this point, we'd be at CAS level, critical incident level 3, which would put us at full activation of the State Emergency Operations Center, and the executive group, which would be making policy decisions, which would consist of the Department of Agriculture director and Ohio EMA and the governor, et cetera, and USDA, would begin to make policy decisions based on, and we'd have all the agencies, as missions would come in, requests for resources, et cetera. We'd have all the agencies activated in the Emergency Operations Center so that we can task out and we can begin to provide those resources. Certainly, we'd send some people out in the field.
To the farm?
Yes. Actually out to the county and work with the county EMA as a liaison for information and resource needs. And so the state would take a bigger role. The governor's declaration would allow us to utilize state assets, activate state assets for use in the field.
By the way, who's going to tell Mr. Yarge, by the way, this confirmation? Who's the one? You, Dr. Doorman?
That's what I do.
You're going to be the bearer of the good news?
Once I receive that confirmation, and that confirmation is going to come through USDA to the area veterinarian in charge and the state veterinarian. That information will come to me, and then I will talk with Mr. Yarge, and then I will also talk with the veterinarian that was involved so that they realize that this is a positive case of foot and mouth disease.
So you'll speak both to Mr. Yarge and back to Dr. Jones.
That's right.
Who's going to, will that come to you in terms of issuing a press statement? Go ahead.
Well, what's going to happen is because the confirmation of this comes from the feds, they're going to make the initial announcement of the confirmation. If we are the first state that has an incursion of foot and mouth disease, chances are they're going to be incredibly involved in the communication.
They being the feds.
They being the feds. Now, I would be prepared, having been involved in the conversations from the beginning, I would be prepared with a pre-approved news release that's going to go out on letterhead from the governor's office with a statement letting people know. Especially one of those messages will be that this is not a public health threat. That would definitely be one of the messages that would be included. We'd be assuring people that all of the state's resources had been dedicated to this emergency response, and we'd be giving instruction to farmers and residents about what they should do.
Mr. Hopper, back to the question I asked you earlier, the administrative hearing. Once there's confirmation, how is that going to affect one way or another Mr. Yarsh's chances of having the quarantine removed?
Well, obviously, his chances just went down. Yeah, and I think...
Sorry?
Story of my life.
You know, I would like just to take 1 second and compliment Mr. Yarsh, because I think he is very straightforward. He says what he thinks, but he really gives you a really good view of somebody that is involved in agribusiness today and really understands the situation, and he doesn't like it, and he's you know, it's going to impact him financially, but he understands what a devastating situation he is in, but the entire state, and how bad it can be if he doesn't do what he knows is right, and I compliment him for many of his statements today.
I just add in parentheses, when I called Mr. Yarsh a year ago, inviting him to come join us today, I'm not quite sure he understood exactly what I wanted from him, but he clearly internalized it, because you, sir, are the star here. And so, on behalf of all of us, truly thank you.
Thank you.
But that being said, your chances just...
Yeah.
And then back to you, Mr. Hopper, how does that all play out, if, in terms of the quarantine, legally?
Well, the quarantine would be expanded, there's no question, and the authority is there under 07 to expand it to include the entire state. Melanie's point that at this point the USDA would be heavily involved is absolutely right, and they may at that point begin quarantines of other states or a regional quarantine with respect to other states. Our governor and director would have the authority to quarantine animals coming into our state and going out of our state. The federal government, of course, could set up much broader quarantines than that and set up a regional quarantine if they needed to.
But before we get national, once there's confirmation, then, Captain Backer, Chief Miller, you're going to have to expand the area that you're enforcing. How do you go about doing that? Are you equipped for that? Do you bring in other forces to help you? And how broad of an area are you going to actually enforce the quarantine?
On an operational level, it would change, and there would be some ways to manage that. In terms of increasing our manpower, we would probably, what we've had to do in emergencies is go on a 12 on, 12 off. That increases manpower that way. Now that the emergency has been declared, it changes administratively who might pay for the overtime. So now, back at the EOC Center, we're going to start tracking what we're doing so that we can get reimbursed in the future. Under the Ohio Revised Code, we can call for assistance from contiguous county sheriff's departments to assist us. So that would give us Wayne County, Ashland County, Lorain County.
But Mr. Hopper here is suggesting that the quarantine is going to be expanded. The moment it's going to be expanded, that means there will be less sheriffs available from other counties because they're going to have to enforce it in their own counties.
The other thing we can do is ask for assistance from local law enforcement agencies that wouldn't be involved in that within our communities to assist with that.
Mr. Adams, sir, you want to add something?
I think that as the state was making their declaration, so that we have access to those state resources from the governor, at this point we would have, as it's part of a technical issue, we would too have declared a state of emergency as a result of this incident. That then gives us access to the state assets, which opens up the National Guard, the Ohio State Patrol, as well as
his son-in-law.
Bringing in the son-in-law. We'll put him at that particular spot. But it opens up those state assets to us that can be brought in to provide additional assistance with people and additional equipment.
Dr. Doorman, once there's confirmation, how's that then going to affect your day in or your night in, night out in terms of where you go from here?
With confirmation of disease, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and again, I don't want to speak for USDA, but certainly in the United States, we have a stamping out. You know, we need to get rid of this disease as quickly as possible, and one of the ways to do that is to begin depopulating the animals on the farm. So we would begin humanely euthanizing animals and disposing.
Depopulating, i.e.?
Humanely euthanizing and then disposing of them.
Call it what it is. How do you make the decision, how many at first, when do you depopulate, when do you up it, and how do you decide how much first, how much thereafter? On the basis of what are you making these decisions, which directly impact Mr. Yarish's financial condition?
How do we decide who we remove from a farm? Is that what you're asking me? Okay.
Who we right. Okay.
Obviously, on an infected premises, the animals that are on that farm that we know have had direct contact would have to be euthanized.
Does he have any say in, maybe this goes back to Mr. Hopper and Ms. Little, does he have any say in saying that these animals were in contact with the other animals? Is there any way that he can, if you will, minimize the damage he's going to suffer?
That at that point, that truly is the call of Dr. Doorman. No, he does not. If her, and she mentioned early on the history that she's put together, if it shows contact, then we are going to force the euthanization of the animals that had contact. And it's absolutely critical because, again, we're dealing with a disease that can spread very, very quickly, have a huge economic effect across the state and the nation.
Mr. Yarsh?
If I remember right, when that hit over in England, didn't they take even some of the neighboring farm cattle, whether they had it or not, in so many mile radius?
Yes. Yes, they did. In the UK, yes. And I imagine, and again, it's up to the Director of Agriculture and USDA, again, their epidemiologists certainly play a role here in telling us what we need to do.
Can an exposure include the air? I mean, if there's a herd nearby?
Yes, exposure can be through the air or the wind from one farm to another. Could foot and mouth disease virus travel from one farm to another on air currents? Yes.
Mr. House, you want to add something, sir?
Just that with confirmation and moving to the CAS 3 level, it's important to note that the state is obviously very concerned about recovery, so a recovery team led by the Department of Agriculture will actually start looking at reimbursement issues, decontamination issues, mental health issues with respect to the animal owners and response personnel. All those things begin happening at this phase.
Simultaneous to the depopulation, I love this expression, simultaneous to the depopulation, you're going to start working on a number of different levels while Dr. Doorman is depopulating.
In fact, the Department of Agriculture is the lead for all of that, yes. We are a support agency, but they are the lead.
Dr. Doorman, go ahead.
The other thing that's going to happen even before I begin depopulating is that these animals need to be, basically, and certainly I may do this myself, and that is I need to take an inventory of what is on the farm so I know what animals are there, and that certainly can be done in that initial phase even before we have confirmation. So I already have an inventory of who's on the farm or what's on the farm as far as the livestock, and then we can actually have those appraised. So we know the value of those animals. And with a disease like foot and mouth disease, many times there are federal indemnity funds. And so Mr. Yarish would be paid for his livestock.
And Mr. Franks, in terms of the local community, what are you hearing from the people? Where are they in all this? People who are calling you.
Well, you know, at this point in time, hopefully there will have been some, you know, official notification to say what the disease is out and what the exact disease is that is going on. And what we're probably hearing from the people at this point in time is, you know, is this going to, number one, affect our food? And what about the rumors about, which we haven't gotten into it, is the terrorist activity, because the people have now put two and two together. And so, you know, our best response is, you know, what we can comment on is the protection of the public health in our community. And you need to really talk about the other issues with the appropriate agencies. And, you know, we will keep you informed on our website of what we know, as would be our response to try to cut down on the phone calls.
Mr. Shade, are you going to be responding the same way? Are you going to be hearing the same concerns?
Well, we have a rather large agricultural community in Erie County, so our response would be kind of the Y in the road. We'd try to take care of the questions and concerns from the agricultural community, as well as the more populated areas of Erie County. And that's where things tend to get more personalized. Folks want to know, can my dog get this? Can my cat get this? Are my kids okay to go to school and eat school lunch? Similar questions that Commissioner Franks raised. But, that's part of our capacity to respond. And just like everybody else, we don't have planned information sheets, but we do have enough folks on staff who are sanitarians or nurses that can respond to those questions fluidly.
Speaking of questions, Professor Sharp, you have a question?
Yeah,
we'll continue. We're just taking a quick time out here.
And this probably should have been interjected before we had gotten the confirmation from Plum Island. But what I was wondering is, early on, when the news story broke, and there was a lot of discussion about this, what we heard was Dr. Sam Jones, who's hiding over there, by the way. He was the one who spoke to the media, and I think it was Dr. Doorman who said that there was a doctor-patient confidentiality which would probably keep a veterinarian from doing that. And I'm wondering, from the perspective of Assistant Attorney General Little, if you would take legal action, or
Mr.
Hopper, if legal action would be taken against somebody who leaked this story and started this potential panic before you all could get control of the story. We see this often in the federal level with, well, for example, against the NSA wiretapping story, they've taken legal action against the people who've leaked that story initially, and I'm wondering if the same kind of thing would happen here to deter future vets from leaking those stories before there was confirmation in the future.
Good question, but I think down the line that might be something that might be considered, but I think in dealing with this situation, that would be very, very, very far down the priority list at this time. We're much more interested in trying to assure that we don't have a spread of the disease, and that's where the resources are going to go.
Could one of the vets speak to the code in the...
One thing I would just add is that, this veterinarian has to stay in business, to feed his family. And if he goes around talking about every case that he ever, stepped on a farm and diagnosed or potentially diagnosed, he's not going to be in business very long. So, he not only has a moral and ethical and potentially legal obligation here to not talk, he also has his own business and his own well-being to look out for.
As I see, we already have people who want to ask questions. Let's go to the questions. Ma'am, you had a question? Wait for the microphone. Over there.
Follow up very briefly, just to the fact that with respect to the veterinarian, it is clear in the code that he has an obligation to provide notice to the Director of Agriculture. That is codified. It has to be done. In addition, just under the statutes dealing with veterinarians, there are grounds for disciplinary actions, and one of the grounds is where the veterinarian fails to report promptly to the proper official any known reportable disease. So it is covered in a couple of aspects that the need to report is there. It's a requirement, and it's extremely important.
That was actually my comment. It wasn't a question. He's on the hook. You guys will get what's left of him after the Veterinary Medical Licensing Board gets done with him, because the confidentiality, especially without a definitive diagnosis, is codified in the Practice Act. So when they see something like that, especially for him to do it to the media, I'm a veterinarian and an attorney. We do have an exception where we're required to report, but it also tells you who you report to, and there's a difference between, you know, the proper state or the proper authorities versus you don't tell the guy down the street, the guy in the bar, or whichever reporter happens to be knocking. So he's going to have one of those letters from the licensing board, and it's not going to be pleasant. And actually, they work quickly. I mean, I don't know this from personal experience yet, but
you've been told.
Well, yeah, actually, yes, because I teach the Practice Active Vet Tech students, and quite honestly, people get real clean once they violated it, but they would jump on that like nobody's business. So we do have an exception, but it also tells you that the exception is limited to the proper authority.
Let's open it up to questions. We've heard here from the panel. Mr. Anowitz, go ahead. Wait, Alan, wait for a sec.
A question for Dr. Doorman, going back to what Mr. Yarish said. How easy or hard is it to contain, if it is hoof and mouth, on one farm? I mean, at this point, is the reality that it's could easily end up a 5-mile radius, a 10-mile radius, or conversely, is it something that once diagnosed, even if it may take 3 or 4 days, that it can be contained on that one farm?
That's very difficult to answer. You're asking, you know, can a disease be contained on one farm? And specifically, we were talking about foot and mouth disease. And because I don't know the specifics, I really can't answer that. Because, you know, what we do know is that it is a highly contagious disease.
In England, did it hopscotch across the countryside, or was it pretty well contained?
They had many farms that were involved in the UK.
I was just wondering, sort of on a practical level, who has the authority to, for instance, quarantine the entire county? Can you do that before there's confirmation? And after there's confirmation, what steps are taken proactively to contain the disease or find out where it came from?
The quarantine authority.
Dr. Briscoe, if you can talk into the mic, please, sir.
Quarantine authority we have is progressive in that you've just heard, dealing with the premise. After that first premise, then we go into surveillance and monitoring mode, and that would go out as a, you know, in an expanding circle as needed. But as you heard, the governor has the authority to make the statewide declaration at the certain caste level.
Chief Miller, you want to add something, sir?
Well, I have a question, because what I heard earlier was that about 15 visitors a day came to the farm during the period when this was contagious. I'm wondering what the USDA would do in terms of, I know they've got the list now, who was there. Are they going to those farms and checking those animals?
That would be part of our surveillance. You know, I can't speak for USDA, but as an Ohioan and from the Ohio Department of Agriculture, yes, we would be sending surveillance teams to go out and check out some of those places that either equipment has moved or livestock has moved.
So
go ahead, please.
So
go
I'm
ahead.
guessing if we had 15 a day, we had 30. And in those couple of days it took to contact them after it was confirmed, they've also moved on and contacted 15 or 30 other people.
So it's spreading out.
Yeah. So I'm wondering how far, we have a statewide emergency now?
But keep in mind, too, when I was there the first time, even before we had initial confirmation, one of the things that I recommended to Mr. Yarish is to try and keep the number of people that are transversing on the farm and off the farm, and hopefully he has done just that. So hopefully that number is limited.
You, sir, would then go, just if I can understand, if Mr. Yarish tells you there were 30 people who came to his house, somebody's going to contact all 30 people, you, Dr. Doorman, Chief Miller, somebody's going to go and then inspect their livestock? In reality?
Most likely that person would not be me. Again, we talked about dirty veterinarian versus clean veterinarian. You know, I've been on an infected premises. Would I go to do surveillance at another premises? The answer is no, I would not.
So one of your colleagues?
It would be another colleague.
Well, then
they would go to that premises.
Potentially also gets dirtied the moment that they're on a farm, which is...
There are decontamination procedures that make me non-dirty, you know, after I have gone and, you know, showered out and changed clothes and those kind of things. Could I potentially move to another farm? Yes. You know, we would like to have a couple 3-day rest period if we can before I move to another just clean farm or one that we don't know is existing.
A question mark farm.
Right, a question mark farm.
Did you have a question?
My question is as far as after there's confirmation that it is foot and mouth disease. Dr. Brisker, you stated that the agriculture would set the CAS level at 2, and Mr. House stated that emergency management would set it at 3. What's the difference? Is there differences based on your department, and what are the legal and practical differences of having 2 different levels set?
I mentioned CAS level 2 because in the general guideline, as we're dealing with one premise, we would be just at the CAS level 2 when it expanded beyond the one premise from our policy perspectives. But we would defer to the EMA for their declaration and would comply with their terms.
Given the way the scenario has played out, it hasn't played out exactly the way most do, and so we would have discussions at the state level with the Department of Agriculture, with the governor's office, with the EMA director, Director Degrani, to determine we're kind of in between a 2 and 3, based on the news reports and some of the public information issues out there, and the fact that we have one confirmed case, we probably lean towards a CAS 3, but there's only one level for the state, and that's at the State Emergency Operations Center, and we would all be in agreement on what that level is.
There's no legal impediments one way or the other. It's just a question of, sometimes it's hard to draw a line, and sometimes you start leaking over into one, and you continue to assess the situation.
I have a question. To follow up on Dr. Doorman's comment about going to other farms, and what Mr. Yarish said about there were other farms that were involved in the UK. What is the apparatus that's set up now that you've determined that there's the disease on the Yarish farm to go to the other farms in other neighboring areas or counties? Because someone on the panel said you might quarantine the entire state. So how do you check the outbreak and make sure that there's not a spread of this disease to other farms in the neighboring area and throughout the state?
The first thing we do is start locally, because ideally we want to start in that first, if we've got we call it an infected premise or an IP. We have an infected premise in the center here. The first thing we do is we begin looking in that first 1 mile radius of that farm. And then as we get more people, as the emergency is declared and we get more people, we expand that. And we would definitely be looking, especially in that 6.2 mile radius or a 10K radius is really where we would start. Again, we'd start small, start 1 mile and keep expanding out. And we call that the infected zone. So we actually would take the infected premise, and through GIS mapping and all sorts of things, we could actually draw a circle and figure out what farms are there, what livestock they have, and make a visit to those farms as part of our surveillance.
Okay, that's part. You have personnel to go out and check all the livestock in that area.
I wish we had enough personnel. We do not, but we also have plans in place to be able to get more personnel, and certainly we have a state organization called the Ohio Veterinary Emergency Responders that we can draw people in from. There is also a national animal health emergency response system that can also give us personnel. And there are, I'm not sure the number of accredited and licensed veterinarians in the state of Ohio, but certainly if they were willing to come help, and that's part of what OVER, or Ohio Veterinary Emergency Responders, is about. It gives us, it's kind of that reserve corps. We've got some folks that we're training now and letting them know about these plans so that in this event, we have somebody who's kind of doing their everyday practice that we have the potential to pull in and be able to help us.
And if you find...
Wait, you need a mic, sir.
If you find the disease within that radius, then what's the next step for the next ring? How far out do you go?
Same thing. The infected zone would go that 6.2 miles. And so do you begin, as you find more infected premises, which is exactly what happened in the United Kingdom, as you find more infected premises, your infected zone, instead of being this nice, pretty circle, becomes this very strange-looking blob because there are infected premises that certainly may overlap.
Captain Captain Becker, you wanted to jump in here on that?
I wanted to comment on Dr. Doorman's surveillance team. Would you be looking for investigators from a law enforcement perspective assigned to the surveillance teams to go with the other veterinarians when they're going out?
That's certainly a potential. And if we're...
One last question. Would you be depopulating the livestock within each ring as you go out and find them and find that they are diseased?
If there's another infected premise, there's no doubt that, yes, we will be depopulating the animals on that.
There's 4 farms, and you find it, you'd be depopulating. Then you go out to the next ring and you find some there, you'd be depopulating.
That's correct.
Each ring.
There was a
Dr. Doorman, when you are on the farm that is infected, are you masked up? Do you
For
wear a
foot and mouth
mask?
disease, you're asking what my personal protective equipment.
Do you wear a mask?
Do I wear a mask? No, I don't.
So you really wouldn't be able to go to another farm because you could be harboring it in your throat.
Another farm that is not, that is clean, that's correct. I can move to another infected premises, but not to a clean farm without some, disinfection procedures for myself, and preferably waiting a couple days before I go to that farm. That's correct.
I had a question. What about since we're talking about bioterrorism, at what point does law enforcement, the FBI, or local resources get allocated to finding whoever may have been involved in spreading this disease?
Chief Miller, Captain Beckham.
If this was a bioterrorism, in addition to being a quarantined area, it would become a crime scene, and there would be a different way of treating it for our part. The gentleman sitting next to you, Tony from the FBI, is actually our contact person.
And we're getting to them in the afternoon. They have all the answers.
What we would have to do is we would want to then be involved in tracking how it got there, where it came from, the information. They mentioned the Fusion Center. There's also a JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, that would be provided information. In terms of utilizing that information, we would heavily rely on the federal agencies in terms of assisting us in what we need to do at the local effort, but they would be the ones in terms of analyzing and using our assistance. We would be using their information, and they would be utilizing our manpower.
Sir?
This is the first point, I think, that fairly large amounts of federal resources would start to make their way informally to you all. Dr. Brisker had mentioned ES11, Department of Agriculture. Jim Neve Van Noven, probably others would be calling you to ask if assistance through 11. This is before FEMA gets on site, but the folks from the emergency support functions, that was the 15 pieces of the overall national response plan, would informally be talking to you all. Emergency support function 8, health and medical, would probably be talking to Dr. Doorman, because there is a veterinary medical assistance team that was just formed about a year ago, actually about 10 months ago. It's stationed right now in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We're going to eventually have about a couple hundred folks up there. And when you go to your backup to the State Emergency Vets Association, then at that stage our folks would be asking also what you got, what you need, those kind of things, before we got down in the EOCs. The other pieces would be ESF 10, folks from EPA would be contacting, working with USDA regarding any support you'd need for hazardous materials, mass disposal. They'd be looking, are you going to burn? Probably not, hopefully not, but if you have to, you have to. EPA, the other part, the air folks would be involved. And number one, DOT would be making their informal calls, because Department of Transportation moves things, and they can help with trucks. You have contracts at Emergency Management, probably 1,000 trucks in a week, but we could come in with that second or third thousand if you need them, hopefully not. But those are the 4 pieces that I think FEMA would see, and we would quote, according to the cliches, we would be leaning towards you. And one of the nice things, that I guess that's by way of flattery, and it's probably deserved, that Ohio is a state that's organized, and the strength and the weakness of our emergency management multi-tiered federal, state, local system is that the better you are, the more you get faster. Unfortunately, the worse you are, the less you get slower, because don't read too much into that, but past history is definitely a guide. But this place has always been ahead of the curve. The last piece of that is that it's good for one of us to be here because we haven't had a large disaster with you all for 6, 7, 8 years, a little floods. So it's a good point for us to be here and look around and have, was only one of me here, but nonetheless, so that if something happens, we can reinvigorate those, you know, to good fortune you haven't had those. In Florida, I know everybody, they know all of us. You don't want to know us all, but at the same time.
There's a question from up here.
Yes, it's a two-part question. It has to do with money. If the first part is, I understood from someone or a slide or something like that, that some part of the law says that the maintenance, during quarantine, they didn't say who absorbed the maintenance cost, but it said the state is not responsible. So my guess is that Mr. Yarish would be, but I don't know. The second part, and please answer that, the second part is if the decision is made to put animals down, who determines the extent to which farmers are reimbursed? Because it did say the code said that the state will reimburse to the extent that they have money, which begs the question.
Mr. Hopper, you get the answer.
I'll try to respond to that. You were correct. As far as the expenses of Dr. Doorman, the state is covering that. As far as the expenses of maintaining his animals during the quarantine, that would be on the farmer. He would, but you know, that's an expense that would be ongoing if the animals weren't quarantined as well. With respect to compensation for the animals, and I'm speaking strictly toward the state compensation, there may very well be a number of federal indemnity programs that I can't speak to. With respect to the state, there is in 941.12 a procedure with respect to appraisal and indemnification. It sets limits for the animals as far as total amounts that could be paid, but that is discretionary under state law. It is not absolute, and it is dependent upon the availability of state funding, and that is codified if you would choose to look at 941.12.
Mr. Yarish, you want to...
Well, the determination as to whether there can be or will be any indemnification is by the Department of Agriculture. If they determine that there is going to be indemnification, then the next step is to check with, and in this case, the Office of Budget and Management, to see if there are available funds in the state to do it. So it's a two-step.
Sorry. Mr. Yarish, you wanted to...
I would say on behalf of that, we've never had a crisis like this, but we've had the last few years, we've had situations on the farm where we've had drought, and we've had wet weather and bad weather, and maybe not immediately, but the government, USDA, the Farm Service Center, has give us money where they'll relief in that. So it's not a great amount, but it keeps you afloat. So I would say if there was a crisis like this, I think our government would come up to bat.
Mr. Hopper, more infected farms means less money available for Mr. Yarish and others? Or are you going to up the ante? How does that work?
I really can't. I can't answer that from a standpoint of my knowledge base. I don't know that. Obviously, the more expense there is, the more impact there is on the pool of resources. So my thought would be that there would be less. Again, the state indemnification is likely to be far less than the possibility of federal indemnification.
Ms. Wilt?
One thing we haven't talked about at all today is the role of the state legislature.
Well, now you can talk about the role of the state legislature.
Developing these laws and rules. I mean, they are the lawmakers. And of course, they would be calling us like crazy during this time to be supportive of their constituent base. So one of the things they're going to be asking us is, do you have the resources that you need? and what can we do to help you? And one of the things that we might be saying if this escalates is that our resources for indemnification are running low. They're going to be hearing it from the farmers too, that they want to be indemnified. So they would obviously have, I don't know if they would have the means based on the current state budget situation, but they would have to evaluate whether or not it would make sense to put some state emergency funds towards something like this.
Mr. Adams, did you want to say something?
I think that that's why we all did the paperwork process early on, because that opens the door for state aid. When the governor asked our FEMA partners for assistance, that opened the door for federal aid. And there are numerous sections of the law and processes by which we ask for that aid as we go along. And part of what's not being discussed is the cost of the response. And your taxpayer dollars paid for that up front, but that can be an undue burden on the local community, so that they may not be able to plow snow down that farm road next year because they spent all their money out there doing traffic patrol and shooing people along rather than shooting people along.
Or inviting them to the bed and breakfast.
That's right, or inviting, and my office is co-located at the bed and breakfast. So, but that's part of a process that is already in place, that operationally the expenses for establishing the program that's out there and doing the quarantine and all of the other responders that would be working at doing the decontamination process of people going on and off of the property, those expenses add up very, very quickly. And I would certainly be looking at my partners at the state and our legislatures to say, get out your big checkbook, and after it reaches a certain point, they're going to be looking at our federal partners and saying, we'd like the president to formally declare a disaster.
Alan? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
First, a piece of information about the spread that was being discussed. According to the OIE, which is the International Monitoring Group, foot and mouth can spread about 35 miles over land, through the air. And if it's being spread over water, because of the humidity, it can go farther. It can go about 90 miles. So that's related to the spread. One thing that hasn't been discussed is that when the confirmation of the first case comes in, then an export ban also begins, and that would have an impact.
We'll get to that in the afternoon.
I was wondering if Mr. Yarish could comment, if he would, from a perspective that if this wasn't on his farm, but he was the neighbor, would he be talking, how much would he be talking to that farmer, and to what degree, what steps would he be taking vis-a-vis his livestock or anything on his farm if he were the neighbor?
Well, if it's on the neighbor's farm, I would probably have to leave it up to these people, because immediately they're going to come to me and say, hey, you might have a problem here too. So even if the neighbor don't tell me of the problem, I'm assuming they will.
Any additional steps as you monitor your livestock?
Well, I guess you just got to play it by ear. I don't know what else to say on that subject.
Very early on, we'd be working to educate farmers. I mean, one of the things that would certainly be a message we'd be addressing with agriculture media. They're going to be asking, what do we tell our base of readers, what they can do if they're in close proximity to this facility, what are the biosecurity measures? And I think since 9/11, that's something that we've been doing on a regular basis, and all of the stakeholder organizations are very good about spending time teaching the producers about those biosecurity measures and how they can implement them daily.
Phoebe?
Yeah, I'm wondering at what point you start limiting the next tier of economic activity. I'm thinking specifically the pickup of milk at dairy farms and various livestock auctions in the area. Because if I recall the history of the UK outbreak correctly, one of the reasons that the spread happened so quickly and so dramatically was because auctions were not shut down very quickly. And then I'm also wondering what the legal ramifications of that are.
Volunteers? I'm sorry. Mr. Hopper, back to you.
Well,
you know, I don't think that the legal obligations change with respect to that situation. I think that if the need is there to expand the quarantine, the statutes provide for that. And if it appears that we need to have, speaking, just coming up with words, if we decided, if the scientists decide that there's a 5-county area that should be quarantined, then part of the terms of that quarantine could be that there will be the suspension of dairy pickups within that area. So the authority is there depending upon the need to do that.
You guys want to add anything about that, Mr.
We
Fowler,
have the ability through different sections of our law, not necessarily our animal disease law, maybe it is, to do investigations at livestock auctions. So we have the ability to check records and suspend operations, and our animal industry division also does, they enforce the livestock dealer law, so I think there are some provisions, and I'm not, that familiar with those, but.
She's correct. I mean, that's daily activity for us. Those are daily activities.
And we have a dairy law also that can do those things, so.
Mr. Yarch, final word to you before we break for lunch.
As far as the milk, wouldn't the pasteurization and that end of it take care of the disease if there was any in it?
Yes, pasteurization will take care of foot and mouth disease. The problem is it's not pasteurized when it leaves your farm. Oh. And so in the hauling of that milk from your farm to the dairy where it will be processed and pasteurized, unless there are some HEPA filters and those kind of things that actually will filter out that virus, as that tanker load of milk is traveling down the road, it has the potential for exhausting virus. So milk would not be able to be moved.
Yeah, I can understand, because many a time I've seen when they picked up milk in the farm that they'd open the hose or the truck would be dripping. So yes, there would be could be transmitted that way.
All right. First of all, on behalf of all of you, many, many thanks to all of you for understanding our time crunch. This is fantastic. We're going to break for lunch now. Lunch is out here. We're back. Hang on. We're back about a minute before 1:45 because Professor Gosson is going to begin exactly 12:40. I'm sorry. You all are back here at 12:40. Professor Gosson begins at 12:45. I told you there's a plane waiting for him. So eat, but eat quickly. You can eat here also.
Well, they did use your scenario. They did use your scenario. Very good. Appreciate your prepping.